April 5th, 2023. I was declared dead at one of the most respected hospitals in Zanzibar. My heart had stopped. My body has become motionless. The monitors had gone silent. Doctors were fighting to bring me back. But according to everything I had spent my entire life believing, there was nothing left of me to bring back. The strange part is that I had spent years studying science precisely because I didn't believe in stories about heaven, angels, or life after death. I was a scientist. I trusted evidence. I trusted what could be observed, measured, tested, and reproduced. Whenever someone told me they had encountered Jesus after death, I would listen politely, but inside I had already reached my conclusion. I believed the brain created consciousness, and when the brain stopped functioning, consciousness stopped with it. End of story. I've never really imagined that one day I would become the person telling a story that would make other people question everything they believed about death. My name is Dr. Elias Mbeki, and at the time of my death, I was 41 years old. I was a research scientist specializing in biomedical sciences, and I had built my career around understanding the human body. I wasn't a man who hated Christians or mocked people who believed in God. In fact, some of my closest colleagues were deeply religious. I respected their faith. I simply didn't share it. To me, faith was something people turned to when science didn't have an answer. I had spent years watching people search for meaning in suffering, illness, and death. I had seen families pray beside hospital beds. I had heard people whisper the name of Jesus when doctors had run out of options. Then, although I never wanted to hurt anyone's feelings, I secretly believed those prayers were simply expressions of hope from frightened human beings. I had no idea that I would soon become one of those frightened human beings. It happened suddenly. There was no warning that morning that my life was about to change forever. I remember waking up and going through my normal routine. I remember thinking about work. I remember answering a few messages. I remember feeling a strange discomfort in my chest, but I dismissed it at first because I had experienced exhaustion before. Within a short period of time, I collapsed. I remember people around me calling for help. I remember being rushed to the hospital. I remember bright lights above me and medical professionals moving quickly around my body. And then I remember something I still struggle to explain. My heart stopped. The doctors tried to resuscitate me, again and again, but I didn't experience darkness. I didn't experience nothingness. I became conscious. And somehow, I could see my own body. I could see the medical professionals desperately trying to save me. I could hear things happening around me, yet I wasn't experiencing the world from inside my body anymore. As a scientist, I immediately tried to find an explanation. I thought perhaps my brain was producing one final hallucination. Maybe oxygen deprivation was creating images. Maybe some chemical reaction was causing an altered state of consciousness. I tried desperately to explain what I was experiencing, but then I saw something that made every explanation I had ever trusted feel painfully inadequate. I became aware of a presence. I cannot adequately describe the love that came from that presence. It wasn't simply an emotion. It felt as though I was being completely known. Every thought, every regret, every secret desire, every wound I had hidden from other people. And then I realized something that frightened me more than death itself. I was standing before Jesus. The man I had spent my entire adult life believing was nothing more than the central figure of Christianity was suddenly more real to me than anything I had ever touched, measured, or studied. And he didn't begin by condemning me. He showed me something else. He showed me my own heart, not the version of myself I presented to colleagues, not the confident scientist everyone knew, not the atheist who claimed he needed no God. He showed me the desires I had never spoken about, the things I secretly wanted, the forgiveness I had never asked for, the love I pretended I didn't need, the purpose I had spent years trying to replace with achievement. And then I understood why this encounter was happening. Jesus wasn't showing me everything I had wanted in life. He was showing me what my heart had truly been searching for all along. I had spent my life studying the human body. But on April 5, 2023, when doctors declared me dead, I discovered something science had never taught me. I had never truly understood the human heart.
The last thing I remember before everything changed was the sound of machines beeping around me. Their rhythm became slower and more distant, almost as if someone was turning the volume down on the world. I could hear the voices of the surgeons and nurses, but their words became impossible to make out. My body felt incredibly heavy, and then, without warning, every trace of pain disappeared. What happened next is something I struggled to explain for months, because no words seem capable of capturing it. One moment I was lying on the operating table, and the next, I was looking down at the entire operating room from above. I wasn't standing on the floor or floating in a dream. I was fully aware, fully conscious, and somehow completely separate from my physical body. Below me, I could see the surgeons working with incredible urgency. Bright surgical lights illuminated the room, while nurses rushed to hand over equipment. One of the monitors emitted a continuous tone that sent a chill through everyone in the room. Although I couldn't hear every conversation perfectly, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. My heart had stopped. I watched as the medical team refused to give up. One doctor immediately began directing the others with calm authority, while another prepared the defibrillator. They shocked my body, continued chest compressions, administered medication, and fought desperately to bring me back. Looking at my own body lying motionless on that table should have filled me with terror, yet I felt no fear whatsoever. Instead, I experienced a peace unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't simply the absence of pain or anxiety, it was a peace that completely surrounded me, as though I had stepped into an atmosphere where fear could no longer exist. Every burden I had ever carried simply disappeared. There was no confusion, no panic, and no regret in that moment, only an overwhelming sense of perfect safety. As I continued watching the operating room, I became aware that something was gently drawing me away. It wasn't a force pulling against my will. It felt more like an invitation, one that I instinctively wanted to follow. The hospital began fading from view, becoming smaller and more distant until it disappeared altogether. Suddenly, I found myself moving through what I can only describe as brilliant light. It wasn't harsh or blinding like the sun. The light seemed alive, filled with warmth, purity, and indescribable comfort. Every part of me felt more alive than I had ever felt on earth. Time itself seemed meaningless. There was no sense of minutes or hours passing. The atmosphere around me was unlike anything our world can offer. The air, if it could even be called air, felt pure beyond imagination. Everything radiated life. Colors appeared more vivid than any color I had ever seen, and there was a beauty that words simply cannot describe. I felt completely known, completely loved, and completely accepted. Then I became aware that I was no longer alone. A figure stood before me, and although his appearance radiated extraordinary glory, I wasn't overwhelmed by fear. Instead, an overwhelming sense of love washed over me. It was a love so deep and pure that every longing of my heart seemed fulfilled in his presence. Without anyone introducing him, I knew exactly who he was. It was Jesus. There was an indescribable holiness about him. His authority was unmistakable, yet it wasn't the authority of someone seeking to intimidate. It was the authority of the one who created all things and held all things together. His presence carried both infinite power and unimaginable compassion at the same time. When he looked at me, it felt as though he saw every moment of my life, every joy, every failure, every hidden thought, every silent prayer, and yet his gaze was filled with mercy. I wanted to fall before him, not because I was forced to, but because I suddenly understood how holy he truly is. Before I could speak, Jesus smiled. The peace I had already experienced became even deeper, and I realized I was about to learn something that would change my understanding of the world forever. What he was about to reveal wasn't merely for me. It was a message I would one day be sent back to share with others.
I thought the most shocking part of my experience had already happened. I had watched my own body from outside myself. I had experienced consciousness after my heart had stopped. I had entered a place filled with a peace I had never known, and I had encountered Jesus, the person I had spent most of my life believing I had no reason to follow. But what happened next was far more personal. Jesus began showing me my life, not like watching a movie on a screen, but as though every moment existed in front of me at once. I saw moments I remembered clearly, but I also became aware of things I had forgotten. Small moments, private thoughts, decisions nobody else knew about. And I realized something that made me uncomfortable. Jesus wasn't only showing me what I had done, he was showing me what had been happening inside my heart while I was doing it. For most of my life, I had been convinced that I understood myself. I knew my strengths. I knew my weaknesses. I knew what I wanted professionally. I knew the goals I was pursuing. At least, I thought I did. But standing before Jesus, I realized that there was another version of me that I had kept hidden. I saw how much of my life had been driven by the need to prove myself. I wanted to be respected. I wanted my work to matter. I wanted people to recognize that I had achieved something important. I wanted to be remembered. But beneath all those ambitions was something I had never admitted. I wanted to know that my life mattered. I had never prayed that prayer. In fact, I didn't pray at all. I had never knelt beside my bed and said, "God, please let my life have meaning." I considered that kind of prayer unnecessary. Yet Jesus knew. He knew that beneath my degrees, publications, achievements, and professional reputation was a man who sometimes wondered whether any of it would actually matter when his life was over. Then he showed me another desire. I wanted to be loved without having to earn it. That one hurt, because I had spent years believing that independence was strength. I didn't like asking for help. I didn't like showing vulnerability. I rarely told people when I was struggling. If someone asked me how I was doing, I usually gave the answer people expected. I'm fine. But I wasn't always fine. There had been nights when I felt profoundly alone. There had been moments when I wanted someone to understand me without requiring me to explain everything. I had wanted to be accepted even when I wasn't successful. But I had buried that desire so deeply that I convinced myself I didn't need it. Jesus showed me that he had seen every one of those moments, every silent tear, every lonely night, every time I had smiled when I was hurting, every time I had told myself I didn't need anyone. I felt tears coming. I remember thinking, how could you know this? I had never told anyone. Then something even more painful appeared. There were people I needed to forgive, and there were people I desperately wanted to forgive me. For years, I had carried resentment towards certain people in my life. I told myself I had moved on. I told myself I didn't care anymore. But Jesus showed me that I had simply learned how to hide the pain. I remembered words that had wounded me. I remembered disappointments. I remembered relationships that had fallen apart. I remembered moments when pride had prevented me from apologizing. And suddenly, I understood that some of the anger I carried wasn't really anger. It was grief. I had wanted reconciliation. I just didn't know how to admit it. Then I saw someone from my past. Someone I had avoided thinking about. Someone I had convinced myself I didn't miss. And when I saw that person, I felt something inside me collapse. I realized I had wanted to say things I had never said. I wanted to apologize. I wanted to be forgiven. I wanted to forgive. I wanted peace. Not the temporary peace that comes when a problem disappears, but the kind of peace that settles something deep inside you. I had spent years trying to find that peace through achievement, through knowledge, through work, through financial security, through intellectual certainty, but none of those things had given it to me. And Jesus seemed to be showing me that I had been looking for something in the wrong places. Then he revealed another desire that shocked me. I wanted to know the truth about God. I had spent years calling myself an atheist, but somewhere beneath that identity were questions I had never allowed myself to ask honestly. What if there really was a God? What if consciousness was more than chemistry? What if death wasn't the end? What if Jesus was actually who Christians claimed he was? I had pushed those questions away because I was afraid that taking them seriously would force me to reconsider everything. But Jesus knew I had asked them silently. He knew the questions I had asked when nobody was listening. He knew the moments when I had looked at the complexity of life and wondered whether there was something beyond what science could measure. And then I understood something that humbled me. God had never needed me to speak those questions aloud for him to know them. I had always imagined prayer as something that required religious words. I thought prayer belonged to people who believed. But standing before Jesus, I realized that the deepest cries of my heart had existed long before I ever called them prayers. My longing for purpose was a prayer. My desire for forgiveness was a prayer. My hunger for peace was a prayer. My longing to be loved was a prayer. My desire for reconciliation was a prayer. Even my unanswered questions were, in some strange way, reaching toward God. Then Jesus showed me something that I will never forget. He showed me that not every desire I had ever carried was good for me. Some things I had desperately wanted would have damaged me. Some opportunities I had begged for in my own mind would have taken me further away from the person I was meant to become. Some relationships I thought I needed would have left deeper wounds. Some ambitions I had considered essential were actually feeding my pride. And I suddenly understood the difference between getting everything I wanted and having the deepest desires of my heart transformed. Jesus wasn't standing before me like a genie ready to fulfill every selfish wish. He was showing me the heart beneath the desire. He was showing me what I was actually searching for. I thought I wanted success. But underneath success, I wanted significance. I thought I wanted independence. But underneath independence, I wanted security. I thought I wanted recognition. But underneath recognition, I wanted to know that I mattered. I thought I wanted to avoid vulnerability. But underneath that fear, I wanted to be loved. And underneath everything was one desire I had spent my entire life trying to suppress. I wanted to know God. The realization broke something inside me. I had spent 41 years convinced that I was searching for answers. But standing before Jesus, I realized that perhaps I had been searching for a person. And then I understood why this experience had been so personal. Jesus wasn't simply showing me that he knew my past. He was showing me that he had always known my heart, even when I didn't believe in him, even when I ignored him, even when I refused to pray, even when I convinced myself that I needed nothing beyond science and reason. He knew the desires I couldn't explain. He knew the wounds I couldn't name. He knew the questions I was too proud to ask. And as I stood there, I began to understand something that would completely change the way I viewed my life when I returned to Earth. Maybe God wasn't waiting for me to become religious before listening to my heart. Maybe he had been listening all along. What happened next was the most difficult part of my entire experience. I had spent years believing that God, if he existed at all, was distant from people like me. I wasn't a believer. I didn't pray. I didn't attend church. I had never asked Jesus to enter my life. I had built my identity around reason and evidence, and I was proud of that identity. Yet now I was standing before Jesus, and he seemed to know me more completely than I had ever known myself. At first, I thought he was going to show me all the things I had done wrong. I expected condemnation. I expected judgment. Instead, I began to understand something far more uncomfortable. Jesus wasn't simply interested in what I had wanted. He was interested in why I wanted it. I saw some of the ambitions I had spent years chasing. There were positions I had wanted, achievements I had sacrificed for, recognition I had secretly craved, and material things I had convinced myself would finally make me feel successful. I had believed those things would satisfy me, but as I looked at them from that place, I could see something I had refused to see on earth. They were never going to be enough. Even when I achieved something, I immediately needed another achievement. When someone praised me, I enjoyed it for a moment, then wanted more. When I reached one professional goal, another appeared in front of me. I had mistaken achievement for fulfillment, and Jesus allowed me to see the difference. I understood that he wasn't saying ambition itself was evil. He was showing me what happened when I made achievement responsible for giving my life meaning. No accomplishment could carry that weight. No amount of money could. No academic title could. No amount of admiration from other people could. I had been asking temporary things to satisfy eternal questions. Then something happened that broke me emotionally. Jesus showed me the people I had hurt. Not just the obvious mistakes. The subtle ones. The times I had been too proud to apologize. The times I had dismissed someone's feelings because I believed I was intellectually superior. The times I had chosen my career over people who needed me. The times I had been physically present but emotionally absent. I saw moments I had completely forgotten, but apparently they had not been forgotten by the people who experienced them. And then I saw something else. I saw the opportunities I had been given to show kindness that I had ignored. There had been moments when someone needed encouragement and I had been too busy. Moments when someone needed forgiveness and I had held on to resentment. Moments when I could have said, "I love you," but my pride stopped me. I realized that my greatest failures weren't necessarily the spectacular things I had done. Sometimes they were the small acts of love I had refused to give. That realization hurt deeply, because I had always considered myself a good person. I hadn't committed terrible crimes. I worked hard. I helped people professionally. I had contributed to scientific research. I believed I was living a decent life. But standing before Jesus, I realized that goodness wasn't something I could measure simply by comparing myself with other people. For the first time, I saw my heart without the excuses I had created for it. And I couldn't hide. Then Jesus showed me something I had never expected. He showed me that he had been present in moments when I thought I was completely alone. There were times I had experienced inexplicable comfort during difficult periods of my life. I had always dismissed those moments as psychological responses. There were times when I had narrowly escaped situations that could have ended differently. I had called some of them coincidence. There were moments when I had suddenly felt compelled to check on someone, make a phone call, or change a decision without knowing why. I had always attributed those things to intuition. I wasn't being shown that every coincidence was a supernatural intervention. I understood something much more personal. I had spent years interpreting my life without considering Jesus. And yet, according to what I was experiencing, he had never stopped seeing me. That realization was almost unbearable, because I suddenly understood that my unbelief had never made me invisible to God. I had ignored him, but he hadn't ignored me. I had questioned him, but he had known my questions. I had refused to pray, but he had known the cries hidden beneath my silence. I had insisted that I didn't need him, but he had understood the loneliness beneath my independence. Then I began to cry. Not because I was afraid of dying. I wasn't thinking about death anymore. I was crying because I realized how much time I had spent running from the very one who knew me completely. I thought about all the years I had spent arguing about whether God existed. And suddenly, the argument seemed so small, because standing before Jesus, I wasn't dealing with an abstract philosophical question anymore. I was dealing with someone who knew my heart, every hidden desire, every wound, every fear, every selfish ambition, every act of kindness, every regret, every question. Nothing was hidden. And strangely, being completely known didn't make me want to run. It made me want to stay. Then I understood something else. Jesus wasn't promising to give me everything I had ever wanted. He wasn't telling me that if I believed in him, I would become wealthy, successful, healthy, or free from suffering. Instead, I understood that he cared about something much deeper. He wanted to transform the desires themselves. Some of the things I had desperately wanted were rooted in pride. Some were rooted in fear. Some were rooted in insecurity. Some were attempts to fill emptiness that only God could address. And some of the quiet desires I had buried beneath all that ambition were pointing somewhere completely different. I wanted peace. I wanted forgiveness. I wanted to love people without keeping score. I wanted to be loved without proving my worth. I wanted my life to matter. I wanted reconciliation. I wanted to know the truth. And beneath all of them was the desire I had spent decades refusing to acknowledge. I wanted God. I finally understood why my scientific knowledge had never been enough to silence certain questions inside me. Science had taught me incredible things about the universe. It had taught me about cells, organisms, matter, energy, and the extraordinary complexity of the human body. But there were questions I had been asking that weren't purely scientific questions. Why do I long to be loved? Why does forgiveness matter so deeply? Why do I crave meaning? Why does guilt follow me even when nobody knows what I've done? Why does beauty move me? Why does death frighten me? Why do I want my life to mean something beyond my own survival? Those questions weren't necessarily arguments against science, but they were questions I had never been able to answer with science alone. And now Jesus was showing me something I had never considered. Perhaps the deepest desires of the human heart were not meaningless accidents. Perhaps some of them were signposts. Perhaps they were pointing beyond ourselves. Then came the moment that completely shattered the last wall inside me. Jesus showed me the desire I had hidden most carefully. I wanted to be forgiven. Not by a colleague, not by a family member, not by myself, by God. The moment I realized that, I felt an overwhelming sense of humility. I had spent my entire life telling myself that I didn't need God. Yet now, standing before him, the deepest desire of my heart was not to prove that I was right. It was to know that I could be forgiven. I understood then that Jesus wasn't interested in making me feel ashamed. He was revealing the truth because he wanted me to see what was inside me. And for the first time, I didn't want to defend myself. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want to debate. I didn't want evidence. I simply wanted mercy. That was the moment I realized something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Jesus had been listening to a man who didn't even believe he was listening. And when I finally understood that, my entire view of God began to change. But there was still one thing I hadn't understood. If Jesus truly knew my heart, if he had seen every hidden desire and every unspoken prayer, then why had I been brought back? Why was I being allowed to return to the body lying in that hospital room? I was about to discover that my return wasn't simply a second chance to continue living. It was a mission.
The next thing I remember was hearing voices. At first they sounded distant, as though I were listening from underwater. Then the voices became clearer. I heard someone call my name repeatedly. Amber, Amber, can you hear me? Slowly, I opened my eyes. Bright hospital lights filled my vision. Everything was blurry. My chest felt heavy, and I struggled to take a full breath. Tubes and wires were attached to my body, and every muscle felt weak. The first face I recognized was my mother's. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she gripped my hand, thanking God over and over again. My father stood beside her, unable to speak. Even the nurses looked stunned. Later, I learned that my heart had stopped during surgery. The medical team had fought desperately to revive me. There had been moments when they weren't sure I would survive, and even if I did, they feared the lack of oxygen might leave permanent damage. Yet, against their expectations, I slowly recovered. The doctors explained everything they had done to save my life. I listened respectfully, grateful for their incredible work, but deep inside I knew there was another part of the story they could never explain. I had been somewhere else. As the days passed, my physical wounds slowly healed, but my heart was forever changed. I couldn't stop thinking about the presence of Jesus. The peace I had experienced was unlike anything this world could offer. His words echoed in my mind day and night. I kept replaying every detail, afraid I might forget even the smallest part of what he had shown me. For weeks, I told almost no one. Who would believe me? I worried people would think the medications had affected my mind, or that I had imagined everything because of the trauma. Even among Christians, I knew some would be skeptical, so I prayed constantly, asking God for wisdom. One evening, while reading my Bible, I came across Jeremiah 29. His word is in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones. I am weary of holding it in, indeed I cannot. That verse described exactly how I felt. The message Jesus had given me wasn't something I could keep to myself. It wasn't about predicting dates or creating fear. It was about reminding people that God's word is true, His promises are certain, and His invitation to salvation is still open today. From that day forward, I began sharing my testimony wherever I had the opportunity. Some people listened with tears in their eyes. Others asked difficult questions. A few dismissed it completely. I learned that my responsibility wasn't to convince everyone. It was simply to be faithful in sharing what I believed God had impressed upon my heart. If there is one thing I want every person watching this to remember, it is this. Don't wait for a dramatic experience like mine before taking your relationship with God seriously. Read the scriptures for yourself. Pray sincerely. Forgive those who have hurt you. Love your neighbor. Care for those in need. Live each day knowing that life is a gift and that none of us knows how much time we have. Jesus didn't leave me with a message of panic. He left me with a message of hope. His desire is that people turn to Him while there is still time. As 2 Peter 3:9 says, "The Lord is not slow in keeping His promise. He is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance." If my story encourages even one person to open a Bible, to seek Christ with a sincere heart, or to place their trust in Him, then every painful moment I endured will have been worth it. I don't claim to know the day or the hour of Christ's return, because Jesus Himself said in Matthew 24:36 that no one knows that day except the Father. But I do know this: every day we are given is an opportunity to respond to God's grace. Thank you for listening to my story. I pray it doesn't simply leave you with curiosity about my experience, but with a renewed desire to seek the one I encountered. Because one day, every one of us will step into eternity. The question is not whether that day will come. The question is whether we are ready.